This is a public service announcement. We want to keep Culture Lab available to our subscribers for free. If you're interested in sponsoring the show, email us at contact@airquotesmedia.com.
That's right. It's contact@airquotesmedia.com. On with the show.
Welcome to the Culture Lab.
Welcome to the Culture Lab. I'm Kyla Ronellenfitsch.
And I'm Gabe Roche. This week in the lab, the data's back. Results are in.
Sample size?
5 pollsters.
Margin of error?
None. No margin of error. Only correct opinions here.
Under the microscope today, our loaded question. Will the polling Oscars snub Carney Supreme?
I love this one, although I don't know if he fits the casting as a ping pong twink, but all right.
Oh my God.
We dive into the data and we speak with an illustrious multi-partisan panel of pollsters to train that microscope on the top issues shaping our public opinion landscape.
We get into the top motivating issue of the day, the economy, immigration, and our volatile neighbor to the south, and how all of this is shaping our politics.
Let's dig in. So Kyla, you are back from Mexico. How are you adjusting?
I'm great. My spray tan is gone. My real tan is like fading. So, it's great. We actually came back to an Ottawa that appeared to be in spring, but as we know, it's always, a false spring. So today it's absolutely freezing rain, which I presume is not the case in Santa Barbara. What's been going on?
Yeah, Santa Barbara is nice as usual, but this week I was up in Silicon Valley. I was presenting an academic paper at Stanford, and it's just like wild to me that this place, Silicon Valley, is the center of like global technological advancement. I mean, it was a lot of like low-rise office buildings and suburban office parks, crappy $5 million bungalows. Everyone's eating chia seed pudding, including me at the time. But I think this place, like, it should look like Shenzhen, right? It should be like this technological utopia, but instead, no, not at all.
You're really, you're true to form, just another ivory tower academic lusting after a communist China. It's really, on track, but I'm sure.
No, I want to.
Yeah, do some self-reflection. I'm sure that they're just one big disruption away from solving the housing crisis, or at a minimum making chia seed pudding not awful. So, but apparently it's a delicacy for you. But that sounds horrible.
I mean, you eat what you're given. But look, okay, today we're with our people. This is our first pollster panel. Very excited.
I actually wrote a joke for the occasion. Are you ready?
Oh, you wrote a joke. I wrote
ready.
A joke. I'm so ready.
What do you call a group of Canadian pollsters?
What do you call a group of Canadian pollsters? I don't know.
No guesses? No, give me something. No, I'm just kidding. A group of Canadian pollsters is called a Twitter feud. I don't know if this is funny to anyone who is not on pollster Twitter, or even for those people for that matter. But it really, I've laughed at my own joke, which is something that I like to do many times.
Yeah. Okay. Yes. Maybe we'll. I don't know. Do a Twitter feud recap episode? Probably not. That's probably let's stay out of it.
That's how I would like it. And I think that today will be kind of no different. So today's pollster panel, I think, will be perfectly lovely. We have Hilary Martin of Ernst Kless Strategies, Oksana Kishchuk of Abacus Data, and James Valcke from Viewpoints Research. All are rapidly becoming the leaders of our industry, and I'm very much looking forward to the conversation. I think it'll be a lot of fun.
Very good. But before we get to the polling Oscars and whether Carney Supreme will ever get snubbed, let's set the stage a little bit. We'll compose the shot, as a director or cinematographer might say. Kyla, Easy question. What's the state of public opinion today?
Easy enough, I guess. In one of my first newsletters of the year, I wrote about this feeling, this dissonance that I was feeling between how our world feels, and which is obviously has been a lot of turmoil, especially generated by our neighbor to the south, which you are very familiar with some of that volatility that's been happening.
Volatility, immersion.
Yeah, but experiencing kind of this difference between what feels like it's been ever changing and the reality of the polls at the time. So, obviously last year we saw a lot of rapid changing in the polls up until election day. And then we actually saw this very long period of stability where really the polls weren't changing all that much in the kind of polling consensus. And certainly what I was seeing in my own polling was looking at kind of like a 3-point margin with the Liberals ahead just a little bit, but really a truly competitive and consistent race. But so far, 2026, the early part of 2026 has kind of felt like an echo of the first part of last year, right after Trudeau's resignation. We saw obviously this super sharp increase in support for the Liberals, largely to actually the detriment of the NDP rather than the Conservatives, but a very quick kind of tightening and then pulling ahead of those numbers. And what we've seen this year is again kind of this very significant increase in support for the Liberals over the past few months. So at the end of 2025, 338 Canada's polling aggregation had the Liberals and Conservatives basically tied, as I said. But by the end of January, we started to see the gap widen. The Liberals between the Liberals and Conservatives. By February 1st, the Liberals were +4. A week later, +5, and today the aggregation shows the Liberals +9. And what's really interesting is this gap is showing up across pollsters. So Leger's latest shows +14 for the Liberals. Angus Reid Institute is showing +13. Ipsos is showing +8, and the latest Abacus release had the Liberals +6. Obviously, +14 to +6 is a very significant difference, both
Right.
In terms of what that would mean in an actual election outcome. But regardless, there is this kind of polling consensus that has emerged that shows the Liberals being far ahead.
So what's going on? I mean, one reason we might be seeing this gap is some weakness, or at least a weakness relative to election performance by Conservatives in some stronghold provinces, and particularly Alberta, from a few polls that have been coming out in the past month or 2 months. Looking just at the polls in February alone, 338 Canada projected 12 Liberal seats in Alberta. So that's up from 2 at election time. Dan Arnold at Pollera wrote a nice detailed Substack post about this. He called The Wind of Change, or as he says, a red Chinook, that I recommend to our listeners. He goes kind of riding by riding in Alberta, especially Edmonton and Calgary, and seems optimistic based just on those numbers from February about the Liberals' chances. Caveat, this is at these really unprecedented levels of support, especially in a slew of Edmonton ridings and some Calgary ridings in the mix. This support, these potential for seat gains makes sense. Looking at Abacus poll that was released on March 7th, had the Liberals leading in Edmonton, 47 to 40. One note, however, the province-wide numbers are not, at the province-wide numbers, they're not at the kind of statistical tie that some other polls had showed. Abacus had Conservatives still up 51-36, but that is a 15-point gap. It is not the 35-point gap the Conservatives won in the 2025 election. And Saskatchewan and Manitoba, Kyla, because you're from Saskatchewan, I want to talk about Saskatchewan. Eric Grenier at 338 projected, again with those February polls, 13 seats from the Liberals. That's combined in Saskatchewan and Manitoba, up from only 7 at the time of the election, or just after the election. Incorporating more polling into the 338 model, including like polls that stretch back a little further to when this gap wasn't really there, or wasn't as wide, the seat projections come down a bit. So the current projections come down a bit, but still 8 in Alberta, 3 in Saskatchewan, 7 in Manitoba. There's a big wild card regionally, and that's Ontario, specifically like Brampton and York region. What we're seeing is 338's aggregation in Ontario is kind of moving in lockstep with these federal numbers. As you mentioned, the federal Liberal lead is going up, but it's these areas, Brampton and York region, where a lot of people say Carney was denied his majority in the last election. So are voters in these regions all of a sudden kind of also being charmed by the 2026 version of Carney, or will they prove a little more sticky in their support for Conservatives like they were in the last election? I'm sure this is a big, big question on both Liberals and Conservatives' minds. What else should they be thinking about, Kyla?
Age, in a word. We've often seen this narrative play out, I would say over the past couple of years, maybe even longer, that acts like partisanship and age are kind of on these parallel spectrums, or there's this linear relationship between the two. So the story goes, the younger someone is, the more likely they are to be conservative, and the older they are, the more likely they are to be liberal. It's kind of a sexy story because it feels very counterintuitive, right?
Yeah.
That's the opposite story that we usually tell ourselves about how people's political attitudes shape as they age. And it also kind of fits this discourse that we're having about our online spaces or about young people, this kind of trad wife, manosphere hysteria that seems to dominate any conversation or any time that we talk about Gen Z, or even, because people can't help but dunk on millennials. We'll loop the millennial generation in with that as well. But this story, it's really not true. There are dramatic differences by gender and age for sure. Since Carney came onto the scene, boomers and even those kind of on the cusp have been, I would say, a bit in love. They strongly approve of Carney. They tend to dislike Polliev, and they're overwhelmingly likely, as in like 20 points more likely to vote Liberal. But at a minimum, the race, when we look at young people, the race is at a minimum competitive, if not advantage to the Liberals, regardless of how you kind of define that young cohort. Some pollsters include 18 to 34, some up to 30. But no matter kind of how you slice it, this group looks very much in play and far from being, this overwhelmingly conservative generation as we often talk about. Yeah. Even leading up to the election, where I think that, again, this narrative was still kind of had really taken hold. It was really a mixed bag. Like, some pollsters showed the Conservatives ahead, some showed a tie, some showed Liberals ahead. And it really, it really was not super clear how this generation was looking. But at a minimum, it's diverse. I think we often have this expectation of other demographic groups, other age groups, that we have an allowance for them to experience political diversity. The same is true of young people. But it's really, middle-aged Canadians, particularly those kind of 35 to 50. I shed a tear as I fit into that bucket. It used to always be in the young, obviously in the young category, but it's really this kind of middle-aged group of Canadians who give Pierre Poilievre a lot of their strength is coming from that group.
Yeah, and particularly among men in that age group too.
Yeah.
Look, as far as I can tell, the only recent poll that breaks crosstabs out to that degree in the public domain is Angus Reid's late February poll. So kudos to them and to you for breaking down those numbers in your newsletter. Another set of crosstabs I'd love someone to release with their next horse race numbers. So this is a call out in a way. We'll cover it. Are stats for voters who are born outside of Canada, and for some racial and ethnic minority groups. If I want to look at that stuff, the best I can do for now is go back to some of the election postmortems from, I guess not even a year ago. Despite Carney's victory, it's worth remembering that Poilievre also received a vote share that's typically big enough to form a majority, right? Sources looking kind of outside of Canada, sources of some of the conservative MAGA strength in the US included maybe surprisingly, significant growth in support for Trump among immigrants and racial or ethnic minorities across the US. Here in Canada, so again, looking at maybe what's bringing some of that really high vote share that Poilievre got, I was looking at an election postmortem from the research firm POLLSTERS, and they found that Liberals led Conservatives among racial and ethnic minorities in every urban center, but this margin, the size of the lead, was decreasing from the sort of levels that we've come to expect in recent history. This is a quote from that report. The Liberal lead among South Asian voters declined from 16 points in 2021 to only 4 points in 2025. Conservatives tied with Liberals among Hindu voters in 2021, but they led in 2025 by 14 points. I personally would love to see a polling firm update some of these numbers so we can see maybe if that's part of the recent shift in and the increase in Liberal support. As you mentioned earlier, we were talking about some of the regions. One of the big stories in the 2025 election was a large swing toward the Conservatives in the Greater Toronto area, 12, 13, 14 points, places like Peel Region, York Region, and the kind of suburbs of Toronto. Look, this is just speculation because I haven't seen those detailed crosstabs regionally, but looking at like Abacus's tracking poll in late January, where they released some urban, suburban, rural subgroups, Carney was personally plus 28 favorability, and Poilievre was minus 13 among suburban voters. So that, that popularity gap, it could be part of the shift. I'd love to see some more numbers on that. Kyla, you made great points about age differences, especially among younger voters. Those differences have tightened significantly, certainly part of the shift. Alberta, part of the shift. And finally, the issue environment. Who's best to handle, in particular, the economy and cost of living? There are indications that gap is closing or has closed. But look, I don't want to get ahead of myself and get ahead of our panel.
Yeah, I mean, we could go on and on about why we think this gap has opened up, but that's what we invited our guests for. So I'm really looking forward to the conversation.
Yeah, we've assembled a really diverse group of researchers who are quickly becoming leaders in the Canadian polling industry. It's going to be a great conversation, so please stick around.
Welcome to the Culture Lab.
All right, we have our first ever Culture Lab pollster panel here to answer our loaded question. Will the polling Oscars snub Carney Supreme? Is now the time for a little drum roll?
Let's do it.
Now
we blow people's ears out. I don't know.
Yeah.
A perfect use of your musical talents.
Oh, thank you.
Our first pollster is Oksana Kishchuk, Vice President of Insights at Abacus Data, where she specializes in multi-method research in all kinds of sectors, particularly healthcare. She's been in the industry for a decade, studied public policy, and most importantly, she's originally from Saskatoon, Saskatchewan. Welcome, Oksana.
Thanks for having me.
Next up is Hilary Martin, Principal at Earnscliffe Strategies and former Senior Manager of Research and Advertising in the Prime Minister's office under both Prime Minister Trudeau and Carney. She also worked on the recent federal campaign, where I'm told she was an excellent focus group moderator. Welcome, Hilary.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
And lastly, we have James Valcke, who is Director of Research and Strategy at Viewpoints Research, a firm with 3 decades of history advising NDP campaigns across the country, including recent wins in Manitoba and BC.
Happy to be here.
Welcome, everybody, to the Culture Lab.
So to start, we've seen a lot of movement in the federal horse race since about mid-January. Are we in a state of political stability? Are we going to see more volatility? Is this kind of our new normal? James, maybe we'll start with you.
Yeah, it's interesting. The last 12 months have been instability on the political scene, 13, 14 months. And I think that we talk about stability. I look at where Canada stands next to the US. I know that's an easy thing to look at. And Canadians, in contrast to what's happening south of the border, look for stability. So right now, there is an appetite for stability, an appetite for things staying where they are. But time and events ruin those plans always. But at the moment, stability seems to be the path forward. And I say that looking at, like, when we looked at that little segment, you know, if you throw your mind back to 13, 14 months, December 2024, where the Liberals and New Democrats were statistically tied, the Conservatives had a commanding lead, and in a period of 2 months, the Liberals went parabolic with a new leader and the tariffs, and in comparison, we are very stable right now.
Well, I'm curious, you know, I think that the polls right now are showing, I think by the latest 338 aggregation is looking about +9, +10-ish for the Liberals. Is Hillary or Roxana, do you expect this to kind of, is this a new normal? Is this where we're going to kind of hold? Is this the new dynamic, or, you know, is this the start of a trend, end of a trend? Where do you think things will go?
I think with the United States and the way that the president there is going about executing on his agenda, I do think that in some ways it makes it difficult to say that things will stay the same in Canada, because we just don't know from day to day what he's going to do, what he's going to say, and how that's going to shape Canadian public opinion. One constant throughout this year is that everything that has happened there has shaped Canadian public opinion. In some ways, I think the attention that Canadians are paying to our international relationships, our relationship to the US, creates some stability for Prime Minister Carney, because we know that that's his strength, that's his strong suit, is dealing with the international community and being the guy to deal with Donald Trump. But at the same time, I was actually just reflecting this week, we're kind of in a space where the issue set, as much as it is dominated by international issues, could change, right? Like, I was driving to work yesterday and the price of gas was $1.57, I noticed, and I'm sure everyone else in my neighborhood noticed that. And so is there also potential for issues that are less favorable for the government, like cost of living, to reemerge? I think that's a question that has yet to be answered.
Yeah, I think we're trending towards stability in terms of vote intention, maybe a little bit more than we were before. And I'm maybe going to eat my words because I feel like we're always asked that question as pollsters, and then half the time it's not what it says it is. But I'm going to put that out there and just say that I think we're maybe trending towards a little bit more stability there. I don't think the Conservatives are going away by any means, but I think Canadians are seeking some sort of stability, and I think they're giving Carney a shot at giving it to them for the time being. But again, time will tell if how long they're willing to give him a shot for. I don't think they found stability yet with him or with anyone, quite frankly. So I think there's always time for that to change, and we're only in March. We're only in March, so the year is young.
I'm curious. I think that the last election was certainly fought a lot along the lines of. I recall a lot of conservative ads about, are you going to give the Liberals another term, kind of like trying to really to really shape the narrative around this is more of the same, more of the conservative, or sorry, more of the liberals. I'm curious, has Carney effectively reset the clock? Like, are we coming down on year 1 of a Carney government or year 11 of the Liberals?
I would say that in many respects, the Prime Minister has actively been trying to distinguish himself from the previous Prime Minister Trudeau. And I think across a number of files, he is succeeding in leaving that impression with Canadians. And it is, like, you're right, Kyla, it's something we heard time and time again during the campaign. If people thought he represented enough change from the previous Liberal government, that was a vote in his favor. And if they couldn't see it, they couldn't get past that to give them his support. So I think what we're seeing now and some of the shift in the numbers is in response to numerous factors. But if he had continued to carry out and govern as the previous government had, I don't think we would be seeing the kind of movement that we're seeing today.
James, has the clock reset?
I think it depends on your perspective. I understand that a lot of the Liberals are trying to the new government is the term that's being forced here in Ottawa on people when they describe it. But I think to a lot of Canadians, well, look, I mean, Carney has had a frictionless leadership since he came to power. He replaced the boogeyman, Justin Trudeau. He is the opposite of Donald Trump. He is the trust. He is the favor. He brings that stability that people are looking for, but it can all change in an instant. And, the next election campaign, there'll be a lot of parties, Conservatives, New Democrats will likely be saying, do you really want to give this government a fifth mandate? And that will be the question they're going to try to make it. It's not clear to me if they have defined themselves as new, or if that the brand drag that they seem to have avoided might come back, and that incumbency drag. Well, I don't know to answer your question, which isn't a good answer, but it's very unclear to me whether or not that's going to come back. But they're trying really hard to make it firmly the new government.
I also think the other contrast he's been able to thread fairly well so far is how he compares to Pierre. I think people are comparing him to the old leader, but also to his opponent. And I think he's done a much better job at contrasting his personality type compared to Pierre and the kind of leader that Canadians are looking for.
I'll also say, things changed. So the one thing that did drive a lot of that movement in the vote switching during the campaign, as we know, was tariffs. It helped incumbents like Doug Ford. It helped Mark Carney. That stability people sought. But does lightning strike twice? I don't know, because that Supreme Court announcement came out a couple weeks ago, and then Trump announced 10% tariffs globally, and that got zero play, right? We were white knuckling these tariffs a year ago, and now it seems as though Canadians have become more acclimatized to this eruption south of the border. So I don't know if that'll be it. But as Hillary rightly identifies, gas I don't see going down anytime soon, and that will have cascading consequences for the economy. And the cost of living is not affordable as it stands, and I can't imagine it getting better. So maybe there are issues on the horizon that will press the government to have to change course again, but I don't know. It's very unclear.
We've been talking a lot about, the movement that we're seeing and where these kind of divisions or how things could look into the future. If I think of my poli-sci student days, which is, just a minute or two ago, Canadian politics has always been defined by cleavages, right? Whether that's on the basis of religion, language, region. But in the year 2026, what do you think is the defining cleavage that we are seeing? Where's kind of that big dividing line that explains a lot of our politics right now?
I think at least one of them has to be what we like to call generation, right? Men 18 to 34 versus women 18 to 34. We certainly saw that during the election, that those groups were voting differently. They were reacting to the leaders a lot differently. Men and women of middle age, and then older Canadians to a certain extent, I would say. But I think we see a lot of issues divided not just along age, but also gender. It's layered like that. You have older people who tend to be a bit more focused on the international stuff, on Trump, and younger Canadians looking more at those cost of living issues and housing, but their reactions to the solutions being offered by different parties and by different leaders is different.
I'm happy to jump in. I have a strong sense that blue-collar workers and unions are actually a really big cleavage right now. And it may not seem natural, but we've done a lot of tracking of impressions of unions, and they are routinely one of the most trusted organizations. We test them against politicians, against the news media, against all other things. They're consistently one of the most trusted and dependable groups. And a vast majority of Canadians have this positive opinion that they contribute positively to society. Now, The blue collar workers as well, I think, is part of that coalition because, as we've seen in Ontario, Doug Ford has gone out of his way to stand next to hard hats and assembly lines. And similarly, if we look on the federal stage, I infer research by omission. And when the federal Conservative Party supports anti-scab legislation, they're not doing it out of principle. They're doing it because their research tells them to oppose it is a critical error. Similarly, when PSAC, the National Civic Union, went on strike here in Ottawa, that seemed like a ripe opportunity right in Pierre's ballpark to pick a fight. And they were silent during that strike. That silence and that vote, plus all the research we've seen, tells me this is an overwhelmingly large cleavage. They have a lot of weight and power. They have a moral authority. Canadians who aren't in unions want to be in unions. We've tested that in the market. It's a big cleavage, and they've got a lot of authority right now.
Well, certainly the blue collar worker, like I swear to God, I've never seen so many hard hats in political ads as we saw in the last federal election. It was starting to get to the point where I was like, 1, 2, 3, like who does not have a hard hat in this ad? Oksana, where do you see the kind of prime dividing line?
I still have to go back to the tried and true of age and maybe the genderation. Is that the correct pronunciation of that term? I think I don't know, when I look at a lot of the data, that seems to be if there were anything to stand out, that seems to be one of the classic demographics that does still contrast with other groups. But I also think we're seeing less and less of like the typical demographics being able to define experience. So I think like Hillary's very right to kind of group the two, like everything's layered. And I think those layers, I mean, that's very generic to say, but I think that is becoming more and more true of like, that is really where we're at this moment in time.
So Kyla was sort of asked the question about sociodemographic cleavages and genderation. I like that, the unions. But I wanted to kick off a conversation about issue cleavages, and maybe they're inseparable. Feel free to tell me that. But a lot of the election postmortems that we saw focused on this kind of battle for the ballot question. Affordability, Poilievre wins. Elbows up with Trump, Carney wins. And Carney did win. But recent polls, according to what we're seeing, are showing the gap in issue strength closing. So trust in Carney to manage affordability and manage the economy is increasing. I want to know from an issue perspective what each of you thinks are kind of top of mind for voters, particularly with the by-elections that are coming up. Granted, they're in like urban ridings, but if an election were held today, not just a by-election, on an issue basis, what do you think the ballot question would be? Let's start with Hillary, because you were talking about gas prices.
Well, I think related to that, be wrapped up in a few things, but I see it kind of like as a question of like securing the future is, probably what would be on people's minds, including the price of gas, because I think that would be sort of wrapped up in the cost of living, something that would be quite top of mind. But that speaks to a lot of different angles, right? Like it speaks to the international scene, but it also speaks to what's going to happen here in Canada, and how are we going to ensure that we never find ourselves in the position that we found ourselves in a year ago, where there was so much uncertainty around what was going to happen with the US and our economy. So I think that would certainly be part of it. The question around like who has a plan forward for a secure future.
Oksana, do you have thoughts on the ballot question?
I agree entirely. My thought was someone who has an actual plan that we think is actually going to work. I think when I think about sort of the cleavage that I chose in age and sort of the generation that I come from, and a little bit younger than me, we've lived in this instability for forever. And so that isn't something that is ever going to go away, I think. Like, I don't think people are looking for stability, but not in the way that I think we might have been looking for stability in previous financial crises and other big world events. And so it's more who can continue to guide the ship when things are just like exploding all around us. I'm not sure how you'd phrase that as a ballot question, but that I think is sort of what I would say. It's interesting because when you ask people what their top issues are, like cost of living is top the charts forever and ever and ever, but it's never just really about cost of living. Like cost of living is always tied to something else down the list, and it's whatever it's tied to and how it's tied to it that I think is really what impacts how people actually show up to vote.
So a stability ballot question is like super macro. Stability versus, I don't know, rupture, maybe that's the wrong word to use in this context. Yeah, so I mean, these are super micro. The union cleavage that you brought up, James, is a little more micro. It's people's kind of daily lives. Do you see the ballot question as being more micro, or is it still up there in the macro stability level?
I think it's when you knock on someone's door, their life is their number. I say this all the time. People are the experts on their own life experience. And those issues of affordability, cost of living and affordability are top issues. I would follow that by like healthcare. That is a constant throbbing issue. And then housing after that, although housing, it can be debated, people could lop that into affordability. But the interesting part about the cost of living, and to glean off of Hillary's point, is that the complaints about gasoline prices have been absent in focus groups when we talk about the cost of living in the last year, I would say. Yep. And that's because prices have been depressed. When they go back up, that is a driver of stress. But I will say, in the last 3 or 4 years, one of the biggest drivers of cost of living, and really connects people in different socioeconomic backgrounds, is the cost of foods and groceries. I know that is not something they think the government can do, but there is an enemy, and the enemy is, well, to be perfectly frank, there used to be a time where we would have a poll about how long it would take in a focus group for someone to name Galen Weston. And that's not a joke. It happened every single time. They can identify who the problem is. So if the government is there saying, we can't solve this, at least they can do is say, we know who the enemy is. And I think the problem right now is that, like, well, by-elections are notoriously low voter turnout, but the parties need to address the concerns people have. And I think that's the driving concern right now for a lot of blue-collar workers who have seen their wage not keep up with inflation. 15 years ago, they could afford different things than they feel today. And we're seeing this not just on the immediate need, but we're starting to see it like, I'm worried for my kids' future living here. I'm worried for my kids' future growing in our community, staying where they are, not moving out of my house. That's coming up more often than not. And I think it's just going to be an ever-present concern. I can't imagine. Donald Trump is an exciting topic to cover at 30,000 feet in Ottawa, which we do, and the parties do, and they have to have a position. They have to be strong on it. But when you get to the ground, to the FSAs, to the poll by polls, people's lives and their concerns become the big driving priority about where they vote. And low turnout means you need to get your supporters out as fast as you can and as hard as you can. So I don't know what it's going to be, but that's a driving issue for Canadians right now.
That's such a great point. Oh, sorry.
No, go ahead, Hillary.
I was just going to say that's such a great point, James, on what's right in front of people's faces. Like when we consider in the Ottawa bubble here how much time we spend talking about Trump, I feel as though, from what we hear in focus groups, what we see in surveys, like, sure, for middle-aged parents with 2 kids, they ostensibly recognize that is a big threat to Canada as a whole. But right, their day-to-day, the crisis in front of them is the cost of groceries, the cost of daycare, all these sorts of things. So it's really important not to lose sight of that.
Yeah.
So that makes me think, I guess, that maybe it was unfair for me to ask you all for a ballot question, because that assumes a kind of uniformity, right? The election is about one thing, but in our intro chat we talked about regional differences. Earlier when we were in the panel, we were talking about socio-demographic cleavages. It makes me think that maybe there might be different ballot questions or different flavors of a ballot question for different groups, right? You mentioned, middle-aged parents might have a different crisis of cost of living that they're facing than others. Oksana, do you have a sort of model of how this kind of breaks apart? Are there key groups that you identify as having like really different ballot questions from others? And I don't think the Ottawa bubble necessarily is a voter coalition, unless it was in Pierre Poilievre's old riding. But yeah, how do you think about the different subgroups maybe that would differ on these ballot questions?
Yeah, I think if I can maybe better articulate my previous point about like what the sort of the overarching question is, I think maybe it's about who can sort of handle a curveball that's thrown at them. And then I think we have to go back to what those groups feel is a curveball in their lives. And I think for younger people, for a long time it was sort of cost of living and those sorts of things. And I think that's certainly part of it. But I think the way they frame that is very different about who can sort of direct my future for the way it's supposed to be. I think I think I'm always going back to this age piece, but I think for older demographics who maybe do have the benefit of being able to be a homeowner, they aren't necessarily feeling the stability just because they own a house in the same way that a young person feels they would feel completely stable if they were to be a homeowner. And so I think where that sort of stability and that the curveball is coming from is very different for those different groups. Not sure if that was a total cop out of the answer there, but
no. But the home ownership thing is interesting because I mean we've talked in past episodes about the Liberals feeling like a bit of a boomer retirement party at times. Presumably people who've like paid off their mortgages, right, living in a little bit less of a state of precarity. So I think
but I do think that could be like if we're making these little tiny different cohorts and voting groups that look a little bit different, I think that really is one. I did some work a couple years ago about what class people think they're living in, because I was really interested in, I like to see how people define themselves, less about where we would put them. And one of the most defining features of class wasn't household income, wasn't age range, but was home ownership. So those who feel like they've owned a home are far more likely to feel they're in a higher class than other people. And I think maybe I'm just going back on my point entirely about like homeowners don't necessarily feel stable either, but I do think it's a bit of a signal of like the kind of person that they think they are and the kind of issues that they would then be voting on.
Also, when we ask people, what do you think the key is to, like, what does it mean to be middle class? What does it mean to have that status? 9 times out of 10 people say home ownership is part of that, right? Like I hear that all the time in focus groups. Yeah, it's one and the same.
It's the HGTV impact. We create a disproportionate amount of content or about shows about home ownership and flipping homes, and it is like a really defining central part of Canadian middle class identity, right? Is like, if not that, then I think that was a really great point. Earlier, James, you had talked about, that there can often be this difference between, and Hillary, you had talked about this as well, in terms of the Ottawa bubble being really focused on Trump specifically, or a lot of our news coverage. So we often see this kind of difference between what a voter would say is their top issue, and then sometimes the issues that are actually the topic of the day or are really emotional and emotionally charged and end up being, easily an issue that people will sort themselves by. And I think when I think of issues like that are not necessarily top of the list but deeply impactful, immigration immediately comes to mind. There's been a lot of conversation about this recently, and one kind of central question that I see that I'll put to you is: did we ever have a consensus on immigration in this country? And if we did have we lost it?
Can I jump in?
Yeah, of course.
I think it's I try to put this circumspectively. In the Western countries that identify themselves as such, Canada is a bit unique in so much that there is a consensus, even amongst our top parties, even amongst Conservatives, that are by and large pro-immigrant. There may be cleavages within that party now that are growing, or are stronger cleavages that are anti-immigrant. But this issue popped up as like a little red flags to us in like late 2003, early 2004, the height of the housing crisis, the height of the inflation crisis. There was a real sense of growing scarcity and precarity. And we saw it was focus groups where it popped up. and it was coming up in a way that it wasn't driven by like anti-xenophobic commentary specifically. In fact, the immigration thing was often raised in connection with housing. There's a real sense of scarcity when it comes to they saw their family, they saw themselves struggling. They're not seeing a lot of optimism for the future. The price of green beans went from $3.99 to $7.99. People were really struggling and getting their heads wrapped around what the hell was happening. They couldn't afford to buy a house. The housing prices were going through the roof. And there was that connection. Whenever people say, I think we need to look at what's happening with our immigration system, they connected it with the worry that they had, or the worry they had for their children's future and their children's prosperity. In fact, that worry came up a lot with new Canadians who said, I'm worried because I went through the system a certain way, and I'm worried my kids, who I built a better life for here, aren't going to have those opportunities that were promised. It's a deep conversation. It's complicated because immigration can mean anything from high-skilled specialists like engineers to temporary foreign workers and international students. And it is a wide swath. We've done research on it and people have strong opinions of it. But on the whole, it has a net score in the positive. People think it's a better thing for the Canadian economy than a negative. So, I mean, I could talk about bliss for literally hours. We did a study on it a year ago, and people have varying opinions, but it is an item of growing concern. But I will say the good thing is people do connect it to the struggles there. It is, in my opinion, it's not coming from a specifically anti-immigrant position. It is about the struggles we have internally in our own country.
Well, I think it's an issue that where there's a lot of diversity of opinion, but so what are those sort of streams, I guess, of thought? Like if you were to put it into some different buckets of how Canadians are talking about this issue, how would you kind of categorize it?
Myself?
Or maybe to Hillary or Oksana.
I would say in the own work that I've done and I've seen, like the connection that people are making is to the housing market primarily, is what I've seen. And this issue, like James kind of said, we saw it sort of emerge at first qualitatively, actually for the data nerds and methodological nerds out there. There's some interesting social listening, which I think is also noteworthy. And the shift that we saw was, I think, different from previous changes in sentiment around immigration that we've seen before, because of this connection to so many other cost of living related issues, specifically housing, and then the knock-on effect that had on opinion among younger Canadians who are more likely to be struggling with those costs. And also people who are not born in Canada, people who are new Canadians themselves, who are also more likely to be facing those challenges. So that was certainly where we have found over the last few years that the issue has more salience, is among anyone who is struggling with those sorts of concerns.
Yeah, I think that the same way. I think the only other tie that we've seen, and this is about a year old data, is really on immigration and crime. I think maybe that's one of the other areas that has peaked a little bit and maybe is a little bit less friendly type of anti-immigration views, and sort of really connecting thoughts that don't need to be there. But I think people also have even on all these groups, have a very nuanced view, to James' point about like different types of immigrants. People are able to hold the same view of both A, immigration is really good for our economy, but also B, they're taking away jobs. And the number of people that say both of those things at the same time is a lot of Canadians. And so I think Canadians themselves haven't really put themselves in a box, which makes, I think, this issue really hard for parties to develop policy on and sort of use the winds of the public to guide them, because the public is thinking three different things at the same time that contradict each other, and they don't really know it until governments start acting, and then they start to see that maybe their views aren't as aligned as they thought they were.
Yeah, and I'll just add the buckets from my mind. They're like the specialized skilled workers, pipe fitters, welders, the engineers, and bringing family members over are seen quite positively. Generally, it is the temporary foreign workers, international students that as we saw, that got a lot of negative light. I mean, the federal Liberals chopped the international student program by a massive amount, which tells me their research was telling them the same thing. But those are the aspects that people didn't see it quite so positively versus the other side of it.
I think those are sort of camps of like, are they giving or are they taking more? And I think when people can easily put those groups in those different buckets, they have a good stance.
One thing that I'm kind of curious to see how it plays out is with respect to jobs. Post election, I think, compared to the 3 years previously that I had worked at PMO, we did see far more young people and their parents raising concerns about the availability of jobs for recent grads, for example. And I don't know that it is developed with the same level of intensity. And I don't know that that frustrations with that issue has been directed at immigration to the same degree as we saw with frustrations with the housing market. But that is something that I would continue to watch closely.
I think to a certain extent, you're talking about this issue and the level of concern almost, I guess, to a certain extent in a positive light. Like, sort of what I'm hearing is, to a lot of Canadians, this is sort of like viewed as a logistics problem. Like, we brought in a lot of people and there's a lot of concern about scarcity, about the cost of housing, about healthcare, all of those different kinds of things. But I think what we've seen, and James, you kind of referred to this at the outset, what we've seen in Europe is that this issue can get very ugly very fast and become very xenophobic. Do you think we're at risk? Are we at that kind of boiling point in Canada? Is that something that you think that we could easily see manifest in our politics?
I mean, if we're talking about cleavages, 23% of Canadians are new immigrants and 14 or 15% are first generation. So that is a massive cleavage of Canadian citizens. So I think there is a sensitivity, and maybe that even creates a bit of a buffer for parties to dull some of the most extreme positions on this. I don't know, though.
We've also seen some pretty extreme action taken in the United States recently, right, in the immigration space. And if there's one thing I think we all know as researchers, it's that the vast majority of Canadians, we distinguish ourselves proudly from so many of the types of actions that have been taken by the United States government. And there is there's a desire to continually demonstrate that our country is different. So I think that while the issue could continue to be a major concern, there's probably a knock-on effect of what we're seeing there, and a resistance to anything that looks kind of remotely like as dramatic as some of the steps that were taken over the course of the year so far in the U.S.
Yeah, we did see a big surge in our numbers about sort of feeling like there was a common Canadian identity, I think, as a direct result of the Trump election. And I think that stayed, especially in areas like Quebec too, where we hadn't seen numbers that we were seeing. But I think the longer that goes on, that might shift. And also we see that young people aren't necessarily feeling this sense of common identity as much as older Canadians. And I think maybe that's that they need to define what it looks like for them. But I think to James's point, it's going to be a new definition because of who Canadians are now. So we really need to figure that out.
Well, it's a funny Venn diagram of older generational Canadians flying Canadian flags in pride of the country, and then the anti convoy people also running flags. It's hard to tell when someone's flying a flag on their car which side of the equation they fall on. But that's how volatile it's been in the last few years, I guess.
I mean, our conversation about immigration and it being linked to cost of living, Hillary, you named some of the groups in particular where there was this, especially housing concern, kind of younger Canadians, new Canadians. It sort of occurred to me as we were talking that these also happen to be the sort of segments that are more likely to get their information from, let's say, media that has maybe a more volatile take on immigration than like the CBC or
yes. And here are
like
where
that.
some of my concerns do lie. Like
Yeah.
I said, watching this issue, the first signal that I got on it was from social listening, right?
Mm-hmm.
And
do you want to explain a little bit what that means?
Yeah, that might be
sure,
good for
sure.
our
So
listeners.
that's essentially like going out into Reddit, and at the time it was still called Twitter, and doing like scraping data from those sites and then doing an analysis of what the topics are that people are talking about, some rough kind of sentiment analysis, like is it leaning more positive, is it leaning more negative? And it was through doing that we noticed something was going on. And my concern with that is that we know things that spawn uniquely from the internet, not always a good sign. In terms
From
of
this internet, yeah.
The balance of the discussion, and the credibility of the sources. So there is, I think, merit to the argument that I think that you're making, that it could have been at the time, the information that people were getting on this topic also, people feeling like there's a link, but was the data actually there to back it up? Not so sure about that.
Yeah, I mean, you saw in the U.S. in the last election, the Trump administration did a little bit on, illegal immigrants taking housing and trying to make that link, certainly to crime, but it was more like overtly, let's say, xenophobic. I think we can probably all agree on that. But yeah, I think we have a sort of consensus on the panel that those feelings were pretty economic and kind of cost of living in nature, and as Kyla says, kind of logistic. But if we're thinking about how all these issues kind of link into cost of living, affordability, the economy, and the discourse is so, this sort of external threat of the U.S. kind of ranking a little bit lower. I wonder if we can talk a little bit about the kind of domestic actions that the government can take, that Prime Minister Carney can take, or that Pierre Poilievre can propose as his plan, kind of in response to that external threat. Are there particular, like, really kind of popular policy issues, policy propositions that stand out to you as things that are clear, like 80-20 issues that the government's got to act on, or risk being seen as deficient? James, why don't we start with you?
I appreciate the question. I feel like if there were out there, the people would jump on them. And I'll say that's a good question because it's really hard and people haven't figured it out. There was a time when the Conservatives were dominating the polls and inflation was through the roof, where the phrase "Canada is broken" passed the nod test. It really felt like they connected with people. And then Trump came into the equation and this big nationalization happened. And this national sentiment pulled everyone back in, but the struggles remain. Those pain points in people's lives are still right there. I can tell you that while in a political gamesmanship, it's easy to say you're at fault, I have the solution. It's not quite so simple in ordinary people's lives. Like, not a lot of people think that the federal government can fix the price of apples, or that their mayor can fix international trade. But if you look like you're offside on these issues, you can really rub people the wrong way. I kind of mentioned that. There's certain enemies out there in the world, and I think politicians are trying to find a way to connect with Canadians. And right now, there's a lot of emotion at the surface with a lot of those pain points, and anything they can do to connect with them. And there are some politicians who are throwing mud at the wall to see what sticks, right? Like Doug Ford can pour out a bottle of Crown Royal and make it look authentic and natural. Other leaders try to work little alcohol gimmicks into their bits, and it doesn't always work that way. So you got to find your lane on how you can connect with Canadians. And I would say the only one that's doing it thus far successfully is Prime Minister Carney, who seems to, again, be hitting the notes on the issues and the vibe that Canadians are looking for. I'm not sure if that answers your question, but it's That is the $1,000,000 question, I think.
I don't know if I agree with your assessment that Doug Ford looked natural pouring out that bottle of Crown. It was driving me nuts. I was like tilted on its side. It's just glugging. I've been holding on to that for a while. Like, isn't there a physics lesson built into this somehow?
He
was
made it longer than
driving
it needed
crazy.
to be. That's for sure.
Yeah. He
Need a
certainly got the
spin-off
point
podcast.
across.
Yeah.
Spin-off podcast, How to Pour Alcohol with Kyla Ronellenfitch.
Yes,
Pressure
I want
gimmicks.
someone to send me like a lesson of, what is the air that needs to go in. That's not really my
Oh,
area
okay.
of
So very
expertise, but-
scientific then. yeah.
Exactly.
Right.
I want to know.
Oksana, do you see any unaddressed issues that stand out to you that might be a ticket to victory for any of the parties?
I'm equally stuck. I think that's sort of where we're at now is trying to figure out what is Canada, just Canada in a box, no one else. What is Canada's issue? And I think it's impossible to separate the two. One of the other sort of themes that we saw, not just Canada is broken, but Canada needs to be first, was another sort of commentary that we saw in a lot of work in certain sectors in the past couple of years. And I think that sentiment would still stand, but is in a very different light because I think those people would agree we can't just think about Canada because we're being impacted by so many other things globally that sort of language doesn't really sit either. And so I think it's hard to just find a domestic issue that is truly domestic. I think people are really starting to link what those things are. So again, like I was saying, that like it's always cost of living and it's that and piece that I think is really linking to the global issues that is just making the domestic conversation very, very different.
Hillary, your turn on the $1 million question. I do not have $1 million to give you, but if you can give me a silver bullet, a silver bullet.
Listen, if I had a policy that 80% of Canadians really strongly approved of, wouldn't that be the best news ever for a former political staffer? I think, separate from what my other esteemed panelists have talked about, I think if an election is called today, the domestic, quote unquote, domestic issues that we've been talking about, because we know they're affected by international issues as well, you'd have to have something to say on groceries, gas, and housing. Like those are the three components of cost of living that consistently keep people up at night, I would say, based on our research. Gas, I think, as James rightly pointed out, has dropped off in the last year for some unknown reason. But
I guess that was a policy change that would have exceeded 80%.
That was a policy change that was 80%.
So there you go. We know
popular.
we can backtrack the advice and know that you're welcome, Hillary.
Yeah.
Hillary supported the abolition of carbon cap or carbon pricing.
Yeah. So I think an answer on those three would be key. But
great.
What is the answer? There's lots of different solutions. I think one issue governments do actually have is that, for example, when it comes to the housing crisis, there's no one silver bullet, particularly with that issue. And I think that's one thing that throughout my time in government was really a struggle, was how do we unify everything that we want to do on housing under one key umbrella that people can get and feel something tangible.
I would just quickly add, one of the vibe shifts, I think, and it kind of relates to what Hillary was saying, is that in the last few years, definitely emphasized since Trump came in, there's an introspection of Canadians as well. Like, what can we do at home? And that has led the way for national projects, right? Like that's there's someone who's had their finger on the pulse of that and knows that Canadians have an appetite for this. And we're seeing that in groups all the time. People talk about a project in their province, and I say, you're never going to go there. It's remote. It doesn't matter to you. Why do you care? And they very much care, and they explain why they care. And that sense of nationalism and pride and doing what we can do with what we have is one of the strong undercurrents of the vibe right now, I would say.
That's great. We only have a few minutes left. So Kyla, do you want to move to the grab bag?
We're going to do a little bit of a grab bag. So some odds and ends that we want to ask you about. So I guess, stay on your toes. So let's start with Alberta. In terms of public opinion, how seriously should we be taking the referendum and separatism, I guess, in general?
Who wants
Not
in on
all
this one?
at once.
I'm hesitant
Everyone
to
looks
jump
in terror.
I'm hesitant to jump in when I have two daughters of the prairies on this podcast with me. Just what people want to hear. Someone originally from Toronto who now lives in Ottawa talk about Alberta.
Oksana, do you,
as one of the daughters of the prairies,
Yeah.
I will try my hand at it.
We're gonna get T-shirts.
Yeah. My writer's posters just over there. I don't know. I was just there, and I feel like Alberta is not one it's not one thing. I think that is something, if not to rag on the Laurentian elite side that I was taught.
No, do it. Drag them.
Growing up in Saskatchewan.
The West one's in.
Drag me. Love you, Hillary. But I think that there's this sort of idea that it's sort of very homogenous, and I think that is so far from the truth. I think if we really want to talk about cleavages and demographics, I think Alberta is a great place to talk about it for things like age, gender, rural, urban. There's all sorts of things. So I think it's not. I don't think they're going to separate, but I think it is very interesting to see that conversation play out as a Western Canadian who was taught other things about Quebec as they wanted to separate. And there were certain views that we had to hold about them, and yet it's happening kind of more out West. So TLDR, I don't think it's a big worry, but I think we should be paying attention to it and taking lessons from what's happening there.
All right, next grab bag item, unless anyone wants to say something more about Alberta.
I mean, polling doesn't show that it has a lot of resonance right now, but time and events change things, so you never know what's going to happen.
All right, well, time and events where NDP leadership voting has started, and I wonder if anyone sees anything in the data that will suggest that the NDP in the short term or medium term will be able to get off the mat and stage a comeback. Is it more likely with any particular leader than another?
I'm sorry, I can't hear you.
Oh no, we lost
Hillary,
James.
this one's you.
How did that happen? Yeah, so anything that I mean, we can start with James if he wants to weigh in on it, or we can give him a minute to think through how he wants to manage his internal
how to
comms.
not get canceled within his own party.
What was the setup for this? Please be gentle. Take two. Be gentle this time.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I'm happy to start, and then James, you can pick apart my take if you want, if that's a safer space in which to operate. If we go back to the beginning of our conversation, we said election held today. What's the ballot question? And we talked about security, like who can provide that like stability across a number of different fronts for the future. And since the election, I don't know that we have seen an emergence of someone within the leadership race who offers a clear path forward on that broader question. And of course, they're having to deal with a lot. Just last night, they lost an MP, which does not lend itself to like a strong, stable messaging of a strong, stable party and offering for Canadians. I think if the issue set changes, like it trends more towards cost of living, for example, perhaps there's a bit of an opening there. But in the short term, I think it is looking a bit tough.
All right, James. Now it's on you.
The setup question real quick. From my mind, and I've said this, when I'm telling on myself and my age, when Jack Layton was elected leader, the New Democrats were at 8 or 9%, and Paul Martin was at 47, 48%. So how it exists is not an unprecedented polling situation. However, it's clear that, the last federal election was a historically terrible result for the Democrats. I'm not sure there's a clear leader about that. The fundraising has come in, and I think it shows one person is well ahead of the others, and that's to be congratulated for. It's raising over $1 million for a party that doesn't have status, and wanting to be the leader of that is an impressive job. But transitioning from a leadership contests are by nature a navel-gazing exercise where the party has a conversation with themselves and people are looking in from the outside making opinions. But once that's over, they have a transition period where the new leader will be introduced to Canadians and define who they are. This is maybe Pollyannish, but Canadians are generally an open book. They don't close people off right away. And a lot of the discussions and critiques of different leadership candidates are currently inside the bubble. Canadians are open to hearing and learning more about them. There's a big empty space of the don't knows, never heard of them. And it is the party's job to define who that person is post-election. I'm not sure if that's the most generic response you're looking for, but I firmly didn't land on any side of the equation.
But that's good. It tells us what to watch for. Now, so everyone, this has been a lot of fun. We're coming up on time, but we do have our final question that we ask all of our guests. And it is this. What's one source of data or of vibes on our political culture, the culture of politics, our zeitgeist, that you follow or read and you think our listeners should be paying attention to as well? Why don't we start with Oksana?
Yeah, to lean on my grab bag question and answer about Alberta, something I've been checking out more is it's on Substack. It's called Common Ground. It's coming out of Alberta. They do a lot of really interesting work on Albertans and their views. One of my favorite posts was my new favorite exercise that I'm trying to figure out how to work in onto little mobile phone surveys. But they asked people to draw what a typical Albertan looked like. And people actually, they went around to small towns in Alberta and actually got people to draw little stick figures. And as someone who's obsessed with different ways of research, I love that one. Little stick figure draw, Pictionary style research. And I found that post especially was incredibly telling. So I encourage folks to go check that out. I'm not going to try reenact the little stick figure that I saw, but very, very much worthwhile.
Super cool.
Very cool.
James, do you have something for us?
Well, I have a 15 and 12-year-old, and Gen Alpha is going to run over us because ego death is daily. But I am tuned into the zeitgeist of the youth these days.
Nice.
But no, on a more serious note, while they are the big influence, on a serious note though, the place I go, and it may sound basic, but as many focus groups as I can, and if I don't get focus groups, as many conversations that are people that aren't politically brain poisoned like many of us, WhatsApp groups with hometown friends, friends and family on Facebook when it's not polarizing. You get a lot of insight and intel that is unprompted, and really that is the place I look for to see turns of phrases or keywords or something pop up, and I'm like, ooh, that is new. I need to track and watch this without engaging necessarily, but listening. That's the active part of it. Ordinary people as much as I can get right into my veins.
Wonderful. Yeah, normal people. Listen to normal people has become kind of a theme in some of the answers to this question.
Everyone turns off the podcast now.
No, we're the smart ones telling you to listen to normal people.
Yeah, we are so well connected to normal youth. Hillary, what about you?
For me, I took this a little bit more as sort of like a data point that I follow. And at least specifically when I was a staffer, one thing we were obsessed with is where people were getting their information and who did they trust and who did they go to for news, but also just sort of the tone and the zeitgeist of the day. And I keep a close eye on the top Apple podcasts and top episodes even, because I find it really instructive. Every time a podcast like Call Her Daddy ends up being more downloaded than Front Burner or something like that, or Diary of a CEO, for instance, I think it just is indicative of who people are spending a lot of time listening to, because these episodes are usually an hour long, and who they trust.
Great. I thought you were going to say that's why you agreed to come on Culture Lab, because we're number one every week. But
soon.
After
this episode.
We're building, right? Well, thank you all so much. This has been really great. Our first Pollster panel, and you've all been fabulous. We hope to have you on again. All right, it's time for Random Sample. Kyla, what have you got?
I'm bringing some polling that Politico released a few weeks ago, which looks at comparative opinions of Trump across Canada, Germany, France, and the UK. In the poll, which was conducted by British firm Public First, it asks respondents who they deem to be the biggest threat to peace. So between the US, China, Russia, or the EU. In Canada, I think no surprises here. This has been like the main topic of our politics for the last year and change. But the US was selected by a plurality of voters, 48% choosing our neighbors to the south. Specifically a threat to peace, though, which I think is a really interesting part of the framing, not just like a threat to your country's economy or what have you, but specifically a threat to peace. 29% of Canadians said Russia, 10% China, and 2% said the EU. But in Germany, France, and the UK, majorities select Russia, someone who is a little bit closer in their backyard, with only 19% of Germans, 20% of French, and 25% of Brits selecting the US. I think that this isn't a full picture of attitudes towards Trump and the US. Obviously, I think he is pretty unpopular in those countries as well. But I think it helps explain kind of part of the story of why Canadians have felt so lonely, why our federal government has at times looked very lonely in dealing with Trump, is that, the vantage point where people are focusing their attention is maybe just a little bit different. The perception of risk and probably the reality of it to a great extent just looks very differently. But I thought that gap was extremely jarring and very fascinating.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, for mine, I thought I'd bring a bit of fair and balanced U.S. polling to the conversation today. So this is a Fox News poll on the war in Iran. I was looking to Fox News because I'm watching the extent to which a war like this, and specifically this war, could break the MAGA coalition that has been pretty steadfast to date. The war's already turned up the heat on the already simmering intra-MAGA feuds. The America Firsters and the Groypers, Tucker Carlson, Candace Owens, Nick Fuentes, Steve Bannon, Matt Walsh are all united in their horror over Israel's apparent influence over the president. While on the other side of the feud, a lot of Fox News personalities, a Wall Street Journal editorial board, some more typically pro-Israel voices have been on the side of the attack. Now, I'll ground us before we get into these specific numbers by saying the Iraq War had 76% approval in the U.S. in its earliest days and 43% at the end. This Fox News poll on the Iran War has actually the highest approval for the war among any of the recent polls that have been released.
That's a shock.
Yeah, Fox News.
From Fox News.
Fox News. Fair and balanced. Voters are split 50-50 on the attacks, with 84% of Republicans in favor, only 40% of independents. That 84% number is interesting. It falls to only 52%, so still a bare majority of Republicans when they're asked about whether they'd favor sending in ground troops. Pooling across all the different parties, there's 25% support for ground troops. It's the Republican numbers I care most about here, and the prospect of escalation isn't currently popular. Though I think, I would bet there'd probably be a bit of a cheerleading effect, and that number could go up if Trump does indeed deploy ground troops. Nevertheless, it has divided MAGA influencers and, interestingly for me, added a wrinkle to Trump's succession planning. J.D. Vance, very much anti-foreign intervention, unless it's supporting the German far-right AfD, seems to be on the outs, and Marco Rubio is in, the favored courtier. If the war progresses, I'll not only be watching a possible split in the MAGA coalition, but I'll be watching for its effects on succession.
If there is succession. No, I'm just kidding. We won't. That's a topic of another pod. Awesome. Well, that's it for our show this week. A huge thank you to Hillary, Oksana, and James for joining us in the lab. We also want to send a thanks to our future sponsors and to you, our lab rats.
Our lab rats.
The lab rats. Gabe, where can the people send you fan mail?
Oh, fan mail. Absolutely. I'm on Gabe Roche on all of the platforms.
And he'll bring up like your childhood bully's handle for where to send the hate mail, or
Yeah, sure. I was not bullied as a child. Are you kidding?
Sorry, that was a big
Popular
assumption.
kid. Oh my
I'm sorry. I'm
God.
sorry. Of course, you were the bully.
Yeah, that's right.
Perfect. Okay, and you can find me at @Ronellenfitsch on all the social mediums and Relay with Kyla Ronellenfitsch on Substack. We will see you all again next week.
Bye.
Welcome to the Culture Lab.